assets. It's kind of an interesting story. Definitely go over and read that. But a couple of things Cam and I pulled out of this unit were, unless you're deficient, you're not important. And I think that we fall into this all the time. I know the government, with all the money that they provide, does it partly because we create these problems, and then you put all this money into it. And one of the quotes said, let's see if I can find it. We need to stop looking at people as dropouts. I think I have it here. We need to stop looking at people as dropouts, drop out this and unwed that. And we need to identify and cherish people's gifts and strengths. We're going to go back here. Because from this whole idea of strengths and weaknesses, or assets and deficits, we kind of fall into this trap of deficits. And specifically that says we can't fix communities by focusing on emphasis, but we do. I can't help you unless I can label you. I can't make you part of my caseload unless you are somehow deficient. Then you become important to me. And that's what we do with in the government. Government has focused on what's not there and then poured billions of dollars into emptiness. And he has this whole discussion on page 177. Reverend Damon Lynch III says that my own community in Over the Rhine in Cincinnati has every human social service agency known to human beings. And we have more churches than we need. We have a church between every two social service agencies. Yet Over the Rhine is still considered the worst community in the city. How can that be? Because we're focusing on the deficits, not the assets. Government cannot fix. And I have this here. Government cannot fix communities by focusing on emphasis. Here's what he says you have to do. You have to focus on the 3 A's. Acknowledge that everyone has a gift and is a gift. Affirm those gifts and then activate them. And he has this story that I'm going to read. It's pretty interesting. I really liked it. This Reverend Lynch told a story about a homeless guy named Clint in Over the Rhine, pushing a shopping cart full of junk and everything that he possessed. Clint demanded money from Lynch one morning. I refused and went pastoral on Clint. Come to church. Clint says, I can't. I'm just a poor alcoholic. That's okay, I said. The church is full of them. But it had no effect. This went on for weeks. I'd go pastoral and he would go deficient. One day I learned that Clint was a skilled artisan. He points the bricks and buildings. That is, he scrapes the old mortar out between the aging bricks and replaces it with fresh mortar. I was pleased to learn this, so the next time I saw Clint, I said to him, I understand you're a tuck pointer. You should have seen the response. He straightened into his shoulders. For the first time I can recall, he looked me right in the eye, and he said the most amazing thing. I'm the best there is. I'm a brick doctor. What a change. Now I'm no longer pastoral, and he's no longer deficient. I'm the guy with the building that needs attention, and he knows that he's the best brick builder in Cincinnati. We need to stop, so it goes back to this quote. We need to stop looking at young people as drop out this and unwed that. And we need to identify and cherish people's gifts and strengths. And we need to start now. The next subunit talks about what can we do to do this? What tools are available to help us get to the asset-based education? Because of the growing trend in demographics and race and ethnicity and class, it's becoming something we cannot not talk about. So what is out there to help us? Well, the first thing that the books, this unit talks about is a kiva, or kiva. I may call it kiva. I'm not sure if that's how you say it or not, but kiva is a Native American term for the American Southwest. It defines a sacred meeting, a place for the practice of tribal democracy where communities reunite for rituals or ceremonies. In its basic form, it's a tool for talking, a technique for improving organizational learning and deepening social and political understanding. So how do you make this work for you? Well, you need to have students, parents, teachers, and administrators, and everybody needs to have a time to discuss. Every person has to have time to talk. If you go to page 1, let's see, what page 1, 82, there is a kiva in action, and I'm going to have you read that on your own. But to start this discussion about how you actually do this, there's a few things you have to keep in mind. You have to understand what is the purpose of what you're trying to get out of it. What's the situation, and how can we improve it? You have to keep in mind physical arrangements, how people are going to be sitting in rows, how many groups do you need, the group size and kiva size. The ideal kiva size is 24 to 48 people as primary participants. The facilitator, how many facilitators would you need? Facilitation is both an art and a science. Too much control is inhibiting, too little is unproductive. The time that you need, questions that you might have or that you're going to address to the participants, the actual place that you're going to be having this kiva, the audience, if you're going to allow people to watch, and expert observers. These are all specific things you need to keep in mind if you're going to have this kiva. And the reason I think they've added it into this particular chapter unit is it is a very structured talking protocol or discussion protocol, and it's important that you've got to have a structured protocol for these conversations. These things are very intense. They said it at the beginning. They can also be explosive, and you need to have things pretty well set in stone, protocol-wise, that walk you through how to have these. On your own, I want you to read the kiva in action because it is interesting. It's the scene is a jail in a major Midwestern city, a facility for males aged 12 to 18 serving sentences of 2 years or more. Most are African American and some are guilty of appalling crimes, often drug-related, armed robbery, rape, and murder. The jail is very old. Actually, it was once a school. Once the former basketball court, people of all ages are seated on warm, squeaky folding chairs. The purpose is to begin a look at a possible intergovernmental collaboration to improve the life chances of these young prisoners. An event unique in the jail is about to begin, a kiva. I want you to kind of read over that yourself. It is an interesting thing. Two things, though, I'm going to pull out of it is what did this type of discussion protocol bring out? One is that it offered an ordered environment for conversation. Two, it provided a neutral process to hear people out. And three, it guaranteed balanced participation from diverse groups. And I think that's important. There's other tools, though, that if this one doesn't sound too appealing to you, there's other tools you can use. Small group discussions, skilled facilitators, stand up and cross the line. I've done this before with our high school students. It's really interesting. Basically, the way this works is it's kind of an introduction to a discussion. And you start from kind of simpler questions to more challenging questions like, if you're born in August, cross the line. If you have children, cross the line. If you've ever been robbed, cross the line. If you've ever had a family member jailed, cross the line. Gives you a great idea of what people have been dealing with. The micro lab, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute, and peeling the onion. So let's do the microlab first. The microlab is a small group exercise that addresses a specific sequence of questions and promotes active listening. Page 185 actually has a protocol, the guidelines, and sample questions. This is an interesting kind of an idea. It usually takes 15 to 45 minutes. It's a term for a small group exercise. It uses a timed process. The microlab is used for team building, participating, strengthening diversity work because it's about equalizing communication and withholding judgment. Peeling the onion is a protocol involving 4 to 12 people to develop an in-depth understanding of an issue, situation, or opportunity. If you go to page 197, you'll find the protocol for that. You need to remember that sometimes your efforts will fail, but failure represents an opportunity to try again. Sometimes disappointment may develop because expectations about what is possible in the short run are poorly stated. There's an interesting, a couple other tools that I think are important for you guys to look at is on page 186, table 5.2 is the tools, the stages of collaboration. That's kind of an interesting table there. The other thing, before we go, that is active listening that I don't have on here, but there is a table for this on page 188. And it is tools for actively listening techniques, statements that help the other person talk. And this is a great thing to remember as you're having these difficult conversations. Also on page 188 at the top, there are the steps for actually having, excuse me, it's not page 197. I have this wrong. It's 187. The conversation is actually for doing the peeling the onion. So it's step by step, 1 through 7, and how many minutes each step takes. It's a pretty interesting idea. The last whole thing in this unit is reflective practice. At least twice before, American societies, I might have this, has tried to resolve the ambiguities of racial and ethnic economic pass through the schools. The first was shortly after the Civil War ended, when segregated schools were established to reinforce the indignities of Jim Crow. That work in a society in which power and control were powerful images of organization in schools were profound, long-lasting, were used as instruments of domination. But the effects on human life were profound, long-lasting, and pernicious. The second attempt in 1950 was a nobler effort. It was the hope of building an integrated America by desegregating schools while largely ignoring segregation in housing, employment, and access to economic opportunity. As noted in the outset of this section, the second attempt ended with about half of the minority students in schools that are 75% or more minority. So will the effort to close the achievement gap be any more successful than these two prior efforts? And the book says this remains to be seen. The two things to think about. After all of this whole thing in this chapter, there are still people or still kids other than minority students, and they call them learners on the fringes. And I thought this was kind of an interesting thing. As the superintendent, you have to be the voice for all of these learners at the margins. Foster care, youth in jail, homeless, recent immigrants, those who don't speak English, kids in special ed. And it's your job to have these conversations, to bring these conversations to the table, to make sure you are the voice for all students on the fringe. On page 190, there is a whole, there is an actual probably 15 questions that you'll need to use or you can use to start this discussion in your community. And it has to be, you need to do it, okay? If you want to start having these conversations, they give you some good discussions to start having. But also, they also give you some questions for reflective practice for yourselves. Some things like, what's the breakdown between race and class in my community? If you asked your teachers and staff about achievement gaps in your district, what would they say? Are you able to break down the data in your district by race and class? If so, what does it tell you? If not, why not? So the pages 190 and 191 give you a great first kind of look at some questions that you can have. So as we close this whole unit on race and class, we want you as your final discussion thread in the discussion board to have this conversation. So respond as a superintendent. So you are the superintendent. And after reading about the ways we can have difficult conversations, why we need to have difficult conversations, making changes to help students on the fringe and minority students, as well as the specific data around minority students, do you think that you will be able to close the achievement gap in half a decade? Like the 23 superintendents said before. Why or why not? And have a discussion about, if you think it's yes, why do you think it's yes? And what are you doing to help that? If you think it's no, why do you think it's no? And maybe some things that you could do to have, to help, decrease the gap. So that's your final kind of discussion that we need to have. If you have any questions, give us a call. It's both Cami Onek and Lindsay Hansen. We'd be happy to give you any additional information. Thanks.